Sometimes, the smallest things. A paint color, a shade of blue, hold the biggest weight. A memory, a promise, a final wish whispered in a fading voice. And when someone dares to stomp on that for the sake of control, a war is bound to begin. All Alex wanted was to repaint his late mother's cabin in oceanic blue. The exact color she had picked from an old travel brochure before she passed. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a tribute, a vow, a sacred goodbye. But then came Karen. Karen, the HOA president of Lakeview Heights. Sharp eyes, a frozen smile, and an iron grip on the entire neighborhood's every detail, from mailbox height to lawn edges. She didn't just enforce rules, she lived for them. That fateful afternoon, as Alex brushed the fine oaks of blue across his cabin's wood panels, the flashing lights of a police cruiser shattered the peace. 2 officers stepped out, and behind them, Karen, arms folded, that smug grin tugging at her lips like a villain who already knew she'd won. "You're in violation of approved aesthetic standards," one officer announced, holding a clipboard like a warrant. It would have been laughable if it weren't so cold and calculated. Karen, ever thorough, brought a solar light meter, claiming the color reflected 2.3% more sunlight than HO guidelines allowed. Her tone was clinical, but her eyes sparkled with sadistic satisfaction. The approved palette includes seafoam green, not oceanic blue. As the crowd dispersed, she strutted over and handed Alex a printed violation notice for $3,000. Attached was a pink post-it note, handwritten in perfect cursive. "Welcome to the community. May today's lesson help you better understand the importance of compliance. Warm regards, Karen W." To her, this was a lesson. To Alex, it was war. She didn't know he was once a corporate shark. A man who had dismantled billion-dollar conglomerates with nothing but a spreadsheet and a pen. And she certainly didn't realize that mocking the final wish of his mother was the one thing that could awaken that ruthless precision again. Karen believed she had taught him a lesson. But all she did was challenge the wrong man. Because when a tyrant tries to destroy something sacred, sometimes the best revenge is to buy the kingdom and burn it to the ground. Alex had dealt with difficult people before. But Karen wasn't just difficult, she was strategic, relentless, and disturbingly good at weaponizing bureaucracy. The day after the $3,000 fine, a thick envelope appeared in Alex's mailbox. Inside was a 5-page HOA violation notice that read more like a criminal indictment. Charges: painting the cabin oceanic blue instead of seafoam green. But the document went further, citing how the color reflected 2.3% more sunlight, which, according to Karen, posed a potential glare hazard for passing drivers. The document even claimed the color disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood, whatever that meant. The penalties stacked up fast. A $100 daily fine for non-compliance, a $500 community impact fee, a fourth of $200 repainting estimate from the A's preferred contractor. Altogether, Karen's price for correcting Alex's mistake was nearly $8,000. But this wasn't just about paint. Karen wanted control, and she played the long game. Within days, she launched a full-scale social media campaign. One morning, Alex woke up to see his cabin plastered all over the community Facebook group. Photos taken at flattering angles, flattering for Karen's agenda. The caption read, "New resident undergoing necessary community education about HOA standards. Sometimes we must help guide new members toward understanding how their personal choices impact all of us. Grateful for a community that values excellence." It was a PR masterpiece of passive aggression. Dozens of likes. Comments applauding Karen's leadership. Residents he hadn't even met chimed in, parroting the idea that standards matter. Alex was stunned. It felt like watching a neighborhood tribunal declare him guilty. Without a trial, without a voice. But Karen wasn't done. By week 2, her tactics shifted from digital to psychological. At exactly 7:00 a.m. each morning, Karen would appear at the edge of Alex's lawn holding a clipboard and a measuring tape. 2.7 inches. She announced one morning inspecting his grass. Covenant allows a max of 2.5, violation noted. The next day, a bright orange traffic cone appeared in his driveway. Attached was a citation. Unauthorized guest parking in emergency zone. Alex hadn't had guests. He hadn't parked outside the lines. But Karen didn't care about truth, only technicalities she could weaponize. When Alex mowed his lawn at 10:30 a.m. on a Saturday, she filed a noise complaint. HOA guidelines, she said, prohibit noise before 11:00 a.m., Section 8.2, revised last year. Every move he made, Karen countered. Every effort to comply was met with another fine, another rule. Another cruelly specific code she unearthed just to keep the pressure on. Week 3 brought surveillance. Karen had the HOA security cameras repositioned. 3 of them now pointed directly at Alex's property. She took high-resolution photos of infractions: a leaf on his walkway, his blinds not perfectly aligned, his trash bin being rolled out 10 minutes before the allowed time. The worst part, it worked. The neighbors who once waved politely now avoided eye contact. People crossed the street when he walked his dog. Children were called inside when he passed by. The message was clear: associate with Alex, and you become Karen's next target. And yet, Alex watched, listened, and documented everything. He knew this kind of power trip always had cracks. You just had to wait for the right angle of attack. It came late one night. Henry Kim, a quiet 68-year-old former HOA treasurer, knocked on Alex's door with shaking hands. He looked like a man being hunted. She's been stealing from this community for years, Henry whispered, handing over a thick manila folder. But I'm terrified. If she finds out I gave this to you. Inside were spreadsheets, bank transfers, forged invoices. Clear evidence that Karen had siphoned over 100,000 from the HOA over 4 years. Landscaping fees with no landscaping. Security fees with no security. All routed to KW Enterprises LLC. Alex's hands trembled as he flipped through the documents. The monster he was fighting wasn't just petty, it was criminal. The war had escalated. And now, Alex had exactly the skill set to win it. He made one phone call. James, he said to his longtime corporate attorney, I need you to form a shell company. Something neutral, untraceable. James hesitated. Are we doing another merger? Alex smiled. No, we're going to buy an HOA. Within 48 hours of receiving Henry Kim's confidential evidence folder, Alex had switched into full corporate combat mode. The same mental gear that had dismantled multi-million-dollar companies and rebuilt them stronger. But this wasn't a failing business. This was a suburban neighborhood ruled like a dictatorship. And the strategy, a textbook hostile takeover. He founded Lakeview Holdings LLC, a quiet shell company with a boring name and clean records. Legally registered, fully capable of acquiring HOA voting shares. Most people didn't realize this, but OA voting rights could be bought and transferred just like shares in a business. And Margaret, far too obsessed with her war against Alex, had no idea she was about to be dethroned from within. Week 1, Alex began building alliances. He started with Tom and Linda Rodriguez, who'd watched 6 families leave under Margaret's iron rule. If you've got a plan, Tom said, we're all in. They sold their 2 votes for $5,000 each. Not because they needed the money, but because they believed in the mission. Next, Mrs. Williams, 74 years old and fine for a wind chime. You mean I never have to hear her voice again? She asked. Take both my votes, sweetheart, and bring her down. The week 2 brought the Johnsons. Young family, 3 kids, ready to move after endless harassment. This is a spite sale, they said, and we're thrilled to help you burn her little kingdom down. They sold all 3 votes for $80,000. Alex wasn't buying votes, he was buying freedom. Week 3, the Millers, still furious over a $450 fine for garden gnomes, jumped in without hesitation. If you're taking her down, we'll pay you to be part of it, they joked, selling 2 votes for $6,000. By now Alex had 11 out of 23 total votes, 1 vote away from absolute control. Then came the absentee landlords. Property owners who lived out of state and hated HOA paperwork. Just make the letters stop. One told him, you can have the vote for $2,000. By week's end, he'd secured 13 votes, a 56.5% majority and full legal control over Lakeview Heights OA. Every transfer was handled with precision. Legal contracts, notarized documents, recorded with the county clerk, all under the quiet name Lakeview Holdings LLC. While Alex built his empire in silence, Margaret was busy planning his public destruction. She sent out glossy invitations to every resident. Si stars resto iromentar ceremoniae. An emergency tribunal. A final hearing to seize Alex's property, revoke his community privileges, and celebrate the enforcement of order. The wording sounded more like a Cold War dictatorship than a suburban bloc party. Witness the power of united neighborhood action against aesthetic disruption and willful covenant violation. The invitation read. It even promised light refreshments and celebratory desserts. To Margaret, this wasn't a meeting. It was a coronation, a victory parade. Alex RSVP'd with one line, I wouldn't miss this historic evening for anything in the world. Margaret probably thought it was an act of surrender. She had no idea it was the final scene of her empire, and the opening act of her public humiliation. The meeting had just begun. I slowly reached down and opened the leather portfolio beneath my chair, pulling out the documents, stamped, notarized, and organized into neat stacks. As rehearsed, James Parker, my attorney, stood up and began distributing copies to every resident in the room. Legal contracts of voting rights transfers, verified ownership control of the HOA through Lakeview Holdings LLC, and a certified record of the newly appointed executive board. The rustling of paper swept across the room like an early autumn wind. Neighbors leaned forward, flipping pages. Faces morphed from confusion to shock to stunned silence. One woman looked up at me, lips parted, speechless. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and spoke with calm resolve. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Alexander Miller, and as of this week, I am the legal controlling owner of the Lakeview Heights Homeowners Association. through the acquisition of voting rights from 13 out of 23 property owners. A heavy silence settled over the room like a storm cloud. I continued, each word striking like a bell. These rights were purchased from residents who were tired, exhausted, by years of financial misconduct and authoritarian micromanagement. Every transaction was lawful, transparent, and recorded with the county clerk's office. And with 56.5% of the total vote, I now have the authority to dissolve the previous board structure, install a new leadership team, and remove anyone abusing their position for personal gain. Karen didn't move. She stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth agape, as if she had just witnessed a car crash she had caused herself. Her hands clenched the edge of the table, knuckles white. 10 seconds passed. Then she snapped. Stage 2 rage. She shot up, finger trembling as she jabbed the air toward me. You think you can just buy your way out of the consequences for your blatant violations? I have protected the property values of this community for 8 straight years. I didn't flinch. I stood still, expression calm, like I had in countless boardrooms while dismantling broken corporations. And during those 8 years, you embezzled over 100,000 from the very people you claim to protect, I said quietly. Now it's time to face the consequences. Karen's voice cracked. Her tone shifted. Stage 3 desperate bargaining. I'll pay it all back, she whispered, then louder, more frantic. Every cent. With interest. We can work something out, come to a reasonable settlement. I shook my head slowly, my eyes sharp now. That window closed the moment you tried to steal my mother's house. It was a death blow. Karen collapsed into her chair. Stage 4 emotional breakdown. Her hair disheveled, makeup running in black rivers down her cheeks. She looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Her voice was barely audible. This neighborhood was my whole life, my purpose, my legacy. But it wasn't over. Suddenly, she stood again. Stage 5 final fury. You'll destroy everything! This neighborhood will fall into chaos without proper rules. Within 6 months it'll be a dump. Her voice cracked on the final word, and she stood there, shaking with rage and humiliation. No one spoke. No one defended her. The silence in that room wasn't fear anymore, it was liberation. I stepped forward. I didn't come here to destroy this community, I said. I came to save it, and I'm not alone. Tom and Linda. Henry, Mrs. Williams, the Johnson family. One by one, people stood. Those Karen had silenced for years were finally reclaiming their voices. I declared, calmly and firmly, effective immediately. All fines from the past 12 months are canceled and will be refunded within 30 days. The paint color restrictions are abolished. Residents are free to express themselves. Grass height and landscape micromanagement rules are eliminated. Karen Walsh is hereby removed from all HA positions. A fair, democratic election will be held in 30 days where every voice counts. Then I asked the room, all in favor. 12 hands shot up. 0 opposed. Karen stumbled toward the exit, slamming the door so hard that a framed community photo fell and shattered on the tile. She disappeared into the night, swallowed by the very shadows she had cast over this neighborhood for 8 years. But I knew. This was just the beginning. The night after the community meeting, I didn't sleep. Not out of anxiety. No, that had long passed. But out of clarity. I sat on my porch, watching the stars over the quiet neighborhood, feeling the weight of something larger than personal victory. This wasn't just about blue paint anymore. This was about what we allow ourselves to accept, and when we finally said enough. The next morning, I walked into the district attorney's office with a folder in my hands. Inside it, the final nail in Karen. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Martinez looked up from her desk as I sat down. I placed the evidence package in front of her with the same calm confidence I had used in corporate acquisitions for over a decade. We have clear documentation of systematic embezzlement, I said, laying out the financial statements. Over $111,000 across 4 consecutive years. Direct transfers from the HOA account to her private company Embedoo Enterprises LLC. Fraudulent invoices. Fake security consulting charges. And here's the best part, witness testimony from Henry Kim, who worked under her and knew everything. Rebecca flipped through the materials, her eyebrows arching higher with each page. This is airtight, she said after a few minutes. We can bring this to a grand jury within days, and she did. Within 48 hours Karen Walsh was formally charged with grand larceny, fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit property theft, and just like that, the woman who once ruled our streets like a monarch was now a criminal defendant. The arrest was swift and poetic. On Thursday afternoon, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived at her home with a warrant. The news had already leaked. 3 local stations were camped out on her street with cameras rolling. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Others watched openly from their driveways. I stood silently across the street as they knocked on her door. Karen opened it in her robe, still clutching a coffee mug, utterly unprepared for the reality that had come knocking. When they read the charges aloud and placed her in handcuffs, the neighborhood exhaled together. Years of resentment, fear, humiliation, released in a single collective breath. One camera caught her turning her face, trying to hide behind her hands as reporters shouted over each other, "Ms. Walsh, is it true you stole from the HOA? Do you deny the fraud charges? What do you say to the homeowners you betrayed?" The segment aired on every local channel that night. Karen's mugshot, stiff, stunned, mascara smeared, became the image of downfall. Within a week, her entire world began to collapse. Her real estate license was immediately suspended. Her bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. She had no access to liquid cash. Her attorney, one of the top white-collar criminal defenders in the state, charged a $15,000 per week and demanded a $50,000 retainer up front. With no cash flow, she was forced to list her home for emergency sale. Word spread. Buyers hesitated, knowing the property was part of an active investigation. The market value plummeted. Meanwhile, we, through Lakeview Holdings LLC, filed a civil suit demanding full restitution, damages and legal fees. The court approved liens against her property to ensure we could collect. Desperate, Karen hosted a garage sale. I watched from my porch as the queen of code enforcement sold her furniture, costume jewelry, and framed HOA awards for pennies on the dollar. People came not to buy, but to witness. She sat on a lawn chair, sunglasses on, jaw tight, unable to make eye contact with anyone. Some neighbors stared, others shook their heads and walked away. Her social world unraveled even faster. Old allies stopped returning her calls. The country club revoked her membership. Her online profiles were flooded with comments from angry homeowners across the state. Even her adult children stopped visiting, ashamed by the news coverage and relentless questions from their children's classmates. Is Grandma really a thief? Karen became a recluse. She kept the blinds closed. The once pristine lawn began to brown. Code violations stacked in the mailbox she once used to deliver them. Her fall wasn't dramatic like in the movies. It was slow, grinding, and humiliating. Just like her reign. Meanwhile, our community was undergoing a renaissance. The new HOA board, myself as interim president, Henry as treasurer, Linda Rodriguez as community liaison, and Tom Rodriguez managing improvements, got to work. We introduced monthly public finance reports, community votes for major changes, and an open forum at every meeting where residents could speak freely. We weren't just restoring order, we were rebuilding trust. Karen had ruled by fear. We led with transparency. 1 month later, the same news stations that covered her arrest returned to do a follow-up. This time, the headline read, "HOA Refo Armendi, Lakeview Heights residents take back their neighborhood." And in every shot, you could see it. Families laughing, kids riding bikes, neighbors talking in driveways. And behind them all, Karen's house, empty for sale and slowly being overtaken by ivy. I wasn't done yet. Because sometimes, true justice doesn't end with handcuffs. Sometimes it ends with something beautiful. 2 months after Karen's arrest, her house, the former seat of her petty empire, stood abandoned like a monument to fallen tyranny. The curtains were drawn shut, the grass had grown wild, and a large, "For sale at Destracidir per Y" sign sat crooked on the front lawn like a gravestone for her reign. But then, something unexpected happened. We called a special community meeting. Not in secret. Not in fear. But with excitement. For the first time in years, residents gathered not to hear fines or threats, but to shape the future. Inside the newly renovated community center, the same hall where Karen once tried to have me exiled, we sat in a circle, faces lit not by fluorescent ceiling lights but by hope. I stood up, took a breath and said, "I know many of you are wondering why Lakeview Holdings bought Karen's house for $75,000. A price far below market value. But I didn't buy it to flip for profit. I bought it for something much more valuable, a space that belongs to all of us." A quiet hush fell over the room. I proposed that we convert Karen Walsh's former house into the new Lakeview Community Center. At first silence. Then a single clap from Mrs. Williams. Then Tom joined. Then Linda. Then, the whole room erupted. Not because the idea was revolutionary, but because it felt right. A place that once symbolized fear would now represent connection. The transformation began that same week. Month 1 was all about dreaming. Residents submitted ideas: a reading room for seniors, an art and music space for teens, a community kitchen, a playroom for children, a financial literacy class for families. Month 2 brought hammers, paintbrushes, and laughter. People donated time, tools, and sweat. Tom and Linda led the charge, turning the backyard, once a pristine chemical lawn, into a thriving community garden, divided into small family plots. Linda painted a mural in what had once been Karen's living room, formerly the courtroom of her reign, depicting diverse neighbors holding hands around a blossoming tree. Karen's master bedroom became the story room, where Mrs. Williams now read to children every Friday afternoon. Her garage became the teen studio, a space for jam sessions, art projects, and even bike repairs. The kitchen transformed into a community food space for monthly potlucks and holiday dinners. 3 months later, we hosted the grand opening. A spring sun beamed across the yard, laughter echoed, and a wooden sign hung proudly where Karen's surveillance camera once was. Lakeview Community Center, from control to connection, and just below it, a bronze plaque that read, dedicated to the principle that neighborhoods thrive through cooperation, not domination. Established 2025. The entire neighborhood came out. Children played games in the yard where once they weren't allowed to set foot. Seniors sipped tea on the front porch that used to serve as Karen's judgmental throne. Teenagers plugged in speakers and hosted the first garage jam session in HOA history. And in that crowd of joy and shared humanity, I stood with Henry Kim. He leaned over and said, "You didn't just fix this place, Alex. You resurrected it." I smiled. "I didn't resurrect anything, Henry. I just removed the chains. The rest the community did all on its own." Karen had long disappeared. Her legacy, once iron-fisted and absolute, had faded into the past, replaced by murals, tomato vines, and music. This wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a reborn community, one built not on measuring tape and citations, but on conversations and shared dreams. It was a cold Tuesday morning in late November when now just Karen again returned to Lakeview Heights. Not as president, not as ruler, but as a moving figure behind the wheel of a rented U-Haul truck. She wore a gray sweatshirt and a worn baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. No more blazers, no more brass nameplates, no more gavel. Her once pristine lawn was now community soil, and her throne, a fold-out chair beside stacked boxes. Most residents stayed inside, watching quietly through their windows. Not out of fear. Those days were long gone. But out of a quiet respect for the gravity of this moment. No one heckled. No one mocked. We had all moved forward. But I couldn't just watch. I stepped outside and approached as she was loading the final box into the trailer. Karen looked up, startled. Her face had aged, months of stress carved lines deeper than time ever could. But her pride hadn't fully left. She straightened her shoulders. "You think you've won something, don't you?" she asked. I didn't respond immediately. I let the cold wind pass between us. Karen continued, voice tight, "You'll see. This place, it needs order. Without someone like me, it'll fall apart." I met her eyes, calm and unflinching. "Karen," I said, "you mistook fear for respect, rules for leadership, control for care." She laughed bitterly. "You think smiles and wind chimes will hold a community together." I nodded slowly. "I think trust, decency, and shared ownership will, and we're already proving it." Karen said nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the trailer door. But she paused. This community, it was everything to me. It was all I had left. For a moment, I almost felt sympathy. But I remembered the fines, the threats, the stolen money, the attempted seizure of my mother's home. I gave her a final nod. "And now it belongs to everyone." Without another word, Karen closed the trailer, climbed into the truck, and drove away. No one waved, no one stopped her. But no one hated her either. We had simply outgrown her. 6 months later, I sat on my cabin porch, the one Karen tried to take, with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the morning sun set fire to the oceanic blue walls my mother once picked from an old travel brochure. The garden below was alive with laughter. Kids ran through the play area that used to be Karen's perfect lawn. The community center buzzed with activity, Henry Kim teaching a finance class in the same room Karen once used to plot her schemes. Mrs. Williams hung wind chimes that danced in the breeze. Linda's mural had grown across an entire wall. It was perfect. Not because it followed every rule, but because it felt like home. And it had been built together. I thought of my mother, of the dream she'd passed on to me. A home where people looked out for one another. Where kids could laugh without judgment. Where no one wielded power to punish, only to protect. We made that dream real. So if you're watching this, wondering if one person can change a corrupt system, I have one thing to tell you: yes. But only if you fight not with fear, but with integrity. Not with control, but with cooperation. Not to dominate, but to heal. And sometimes the best way to fight back isn't to destroy the system. It's to buy it, fix it, and give it back to the people who truly belong. Your dream is only taken from you when you stop defending it. So go ahead, paint your house any color you like. If you've made it this far, thank you. Truly. This story isn't just about me, or Karen, or one little neighborhood. It's about you. And anyone who's ever been pushed aside just for wanting to be themselves. Drop a comment below. Have you ever faced a Karen in your life? What color would you paint your dream home if no one could stop you? If this story meant something to you, hit like to support the kind of values that deserve more space in this world: kindness over control, courage over silence. Share this video with your friends, your family, your neighbors, especially anyone being crushed by the weight of unfair authority. And if you want more stories of justice, redemption, and the kind of comebacks that hit hard and heal deep. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next video might be exactly what you need. Thanks for staying till the end.